All right, let's dive in. You've given us a mountain of information about mosquitoes, and it looks like you're interested in way more than just how to keep from getting bitten. This is serious stuff. We'll try to figure out what's really important for you to know about mosquito control. Now, the manual starts with kind of like Insect Biology 101. It might feel like going back to high school biology class.
Right.
But I'm guessing they do that for a reason.
Absolutely. You can't really fight an enemy you don't understand. And to really understand why mosquitoes are such a unique challenge, we kind of have to understand why they're even classified as insects to begin with.
Okay, fair enough. So what sets insects apart from other creatures?
Well, there are three key things. First, insects, their bodies have three distinct regions: the head, the thorax, and the abdomen.
Okay.
Second, they have 6 legs. It's kind of a trademark of a true insect. And then finally, instead of internal skeletons like we have, they have tough exoskeletons on the outside. It's kind of like wearing armor.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so those are the insect basics. Now, how do mosquitoes fit into all of this? They definitely seem to have like a more complex life than, let's say, an ant.
You're right. They undergo this wild process called complete metamorphosis. So imagine like starting as an egg, then transforming into this totally different looking larva, then a pupa, and then finally emerging as a winged adult.
That's a pretty dramatic makeover.
It is. It is.
So it's 4 distinct stages, each with its own, I'm sure, little quirks and interesting things about it. So let's kind of take them one by one, starting with the egg stage. Where do we even find mosquito eggs?
Well, it all begins in water, or at least places that will eventually be flooded. So think like ditches, puddles, even those forgotten buckets in your backyard.
Right.
Some species are super picky about their egg-laying spots, while others are a bit less discerning.
Okay, so once those eggs hatch, we get the infamous mosquito larvae. Those are the little wriggly things I always see in stagnant water.
Precisely. And here's where it gets interesting. These larvae have evolved some pretty clever ways to breathe underwater.
Okay.
So they have this tube-like siphon that acts like a built-in snorkel, allowing them to get oxygen from the surface while they kind of hang out below.
Wow, that's pretty smart. But what about species like Anopheles, the ones that spread malaria? Their larvae seem to rest differently in the water.
Good eye. Anopheles larvae, they don't hang down like the others. They use these special hairs called palmate hairs to actually lie parallel to the water surface while they're feeding. So it's all about maximizing their feeding efficiency while staying kind of hidden from predators.
Interesting. So after their underwater adventures, the larvae enter the pupa stage, right? That's kind of like their cocoon phase.
Exactly. It's a time of radical transformation. They're encased in this pupal shell, not eating, just focusing on developing into their final adult form.
So it's like a big metamorphosis.
It is. It is.
And then finally out pops the winged adult mosquito, ready to make our lives a bit more interesting.
That they do. And not all adult mosquitoes are created equal, right?
Right.
The training manual goes into detail about their anatomy, specifically the proboscis, that needle-like mouth part.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that. Is it really just like one sharp needle?
Well, actually, it's even more impressive. It's actually made up of 7 needle-like stylets, all working together to pierce the skin and draw blood.
7 needles. Oh, okay. That explains a lot. And I'm guessing the males and females have different proboscises, right? Because don't just the females bite us?
You're exactly right. The female mosquitoes, they need that blood meal to actually produce their eggs. Males, on the other hand, they're perfectly content sipping on nectar and plant juices.
Gotcha. So it is the ladies we need to watch out for.
You got it.
All right. Now that we've kind of got those basics down, let's get to the who's who of Louisiana mosquitoes. The manual goes into what they call the bionomics of the most important species in the state. And to keep it organized, they seem to group them by where they like to breed. First up, the container breeding mosquitoes. Those are the ones that take advantage of any little bit of standing water they can find.
They're the opportunists of the mosquito world, really. Yeah. So think tires, buckets, flower pots, even those little saucers under potted plants.
Oh, okay.
And they can be a real headache for people living in urban areas because there are always containers around.
So it's not just the swamps and marshes we have to worry about?
No, not at all.
Interesting.
2 species to really keep in mind are Aedes aegypti and Aedes triceriatus. You've probably heard of Aedes aegypti. They're infamous for spreading diseases like Zika, dengue, and yellow fever.
Oh, yeah. I have definitely heard of those. Those all sound pretty serious. What makes Aedes aegypti so good at spreading diseases, particularly in cities and towns?
Well, they've kind of evolved to become incredibly adapted to urban environments.
Okay.
They prefer to lay their eggs in artificial containers, close to human dwellings. And they're also aggressive daytime biters, which increases their chances of transmitting those diseases.
So even just a tiny little bit of water left standing near your house could become like a breeding ground for these disease-carrying mosquitoes.
Absolutely, yeah.
That's a little unnerving.
It is.
What about Aedes triceriatus? What makes them stand out?
Well, they're known as the eastern tree hole mosquito because they naturally breed in, well, tree holes.
Okay.
But they've also adapted to using artificial containers. And here's the kicker. They can actually survive much colder temperatures than other container breeders.
So they're around for longer. That doesn't sound like good news.
It means they can start breeding earlier in the spring and continue later into the fall, which really extends the mosquito season and the potential for disease transmission.
All right. So we've got the container breeders covered. What's the next category?
Next, we have the mosquitoes that prefer more permanent bodies of water,
Okay.
like swamps, marshes, ponds, ditches. We call these the permanent water breeders.
Okay. So that brings to mind Anopheles quadrimaculatus, the malaria mosquito. Now, it's a relief that malaria isn't a huge problem in the U.S. anymore, but I'm guessing these mosquitoes are still out there.
Oh, they are. But here's a twist. What we used to think of as one species, Anopheles quadrimaculatus, is actually a complex of 5 distinct species that are incredibly hard to tell apart.
Wow.
Recent studies have shown they actually have different behaviors, habitat preferences, and even different levels of disease transmission potential.
So even within one species, there's like a lot of variation that we're only just now beginning to understand.
Right.
That makes mosquito control even more complex.
It does.
Okay. All right. What is the last category of mosquito that we need to know about?
Well, the final group is the floodwater breeders. These guys have evolved to take advantage of the boom and bust cycle of flooding. So think salt marshes, floodplains, and areas that are just inundated after a heavy rain. These mosquitoes lay their eggs in the moist soil, and those eggs can sit dormant, sometimes for years, until they're submerged by a flood.
So it's like a waiting game.
Exactly. And when conditions are right, those eggs hatch en masse, leading to those huge swarms you sometimes see after a flood.
Right.
2 notorious floodwater breeders in Louisiana are Aedes sollicitans and Aedes vexans.
Okay, tell me more about Aedes sollicitans. What makes them so tough?
Well, they're known as the salt marsh mosquito,
Oh.
and they are the bane of anyone who lives near the coast. They can actually tolerate the harsh, salty conditions of salt marshes that would just kill off other mosquito species. And their eggs, they actually have a very unique requirement. They actually need to dry out for several days before they can hatch when flooded.
So even just a brief dry spell won't stop them.
Nope.
What about Aedes vexans? Are they as hardy?
Aedes vexans, also known as the inland floodwater mosquito, is incredibly common throughout Louisiana. They don't need those salty conditions to survive, and they're known for their exceptionally painful bites.
Ouch.
So if you're ever near a flooded area inland, Aedes vexans is likely to be the one leaving those itchy welts.
Right. So we've got the container breeders, the permanent water breeders, and the floodwater breeders.
You do.
A diverse cast of characters, each with their own little strategies for survival.
Absolutely.
But knowing the species is only half the battle, right? We also need to know where they like to hang out.
You got it. The training manual describes the various mosquito habitats you're likely to find in Louisiana. And it goes way beyond just, the obvious swamps and mayas. Understanding those connections between habitat and species is vital for effective mosquito control.
So let's dive into those habitats. We already talked about artificial containers as breeding grounds for certain species, particularly in urban areas. What are some examples that might surprise people?
Oh, you'd be amazed what can become a mosquito nursery. Discarded tires are notorious.
Right.
But even something as small as a bottle cap filled with rainwater can support mosquito larvae.
Really?
So
Yeah.
clogged gutters, bird baths, flower pots, those decorative ponds people put in their yards, they all pose risks if they're not properly maintained.
So it's not just about avoiding the swamps. We need to be mindful of potential mosquito breeding grounds right in our own backyards.
Absolutely.
Okay. What about natural habitats? Are there any that stand out as particularly mosquito friendly in Louisiana?
Absolutely. Cypress swamps, for example, are ideal breeding grounds for Anopheles crucians,
Okay.
which transmit a milder form of malaria. And those vast salt marshes along the coast, as we mentioned, are home to the incredibly resilient Aedes sollicitans. Then you've got cattail marshes, ditches, woodland pools, even larger wetlands. They all provide suitable breeding grounds for different mosquito species.
It sounds like Louisiana offers a buffet of options for these mosquitoes.
It does, and that's why understanding those connections between habitat and species is so important for mosquito control. It's not a one-size-fits-all approach, right?
Right.
You need to know which species are likely to be found in which habitats to really target your control efforts effectively.
Okay. All right, it's time to address the elephant in the room. We've talked about mosquito biology and their habitats, but now let's get to the serious stuff. The diseases these little bloodsuckers can spread.
Yeah, it's easy to just dismiss them as just a nuisance.
Yeah.
But mosquitoes are actually considered one of the deadliest animals on the planet because of their ability to transmit this wide range of pathogens. And Louisiana, with its warm climate and abundant mosquito habitats, is particularly vulnerable.
Yeah. The training manual goes through the major mosquito-borne diseases in the state. And to understand how they spread, I think we need to define a couple of key terms.
Okay.
Amplification vector and bridge vector.
All right.
Can you explain those?
I can. So think of an amplification vector as a mosquito species that's really good at spreading a particular virus among its preferred hosts. So they pick up the virus from infected animals, called reservoir hosts, and then efficiently transmit it to other animals of the same species. So they're amplifying the virus's presence in the environment.
So they're keeping the virus circulating within a specific animal population.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
A bridge vector, on the other hand, is a mosquito species that can pick up a virus from a reservoir host and then transmit it to a different kind of animal that wouldn't normally be exposed, like a human.
So they're bridging the gap between the reservoir and us.
Precisely.
Okay.
And that's how a lot of mosquito-borne diseases spill over into human populations.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the manual breaks down the diseases by the type of reservoir host.
Right.
Let's start with diseases with bird reservoirs.
Okay. In Louisiana, the most common concern in this category is West Nile virus, or WNV.
All right.
It's a virus that can cause encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain. The good news is that most people infected with WNV don't even experience any symptoms.
Okay.
But for some, it can lead to serious complications.
And birds are the primary reservoir for West Nile virus, meaning they can carry the virus but not get sick themselves.
That's right. Birds are really the key players in the WNV transmission cycle. A mosquito species called Culex quinquefasciatus, also known as the southern house mosquito, is a major amplification vector for WNV.
Okay.
They feed on infected birds, pick up the virus, and then spread it to other birds, continuing the cycle.
So how do humans get involved in this bird-mosquito cycle?
Well, unfortunately, Culex quinquefasciatus will also feed on humans. And that's how we can get infected with WNV. But we're considered dead-end hosts, meaning we can get sick, but we can't transmit the virus back to mosquitoes.
So we're not part of the main transmission cycle, which is some small comfort, I guess. Are there other diseases with bird reservoirs that we need to be aware of in Louisiana?
Yeah, there are two others to keep on your radar: St. Louis encephalitis, or SLE, and Eastern equine encephalitis, or EE. SLE is similar to WNV in that it can cause encephalitis, and is primarily transmitted by Culex quinquefasciatus.
Is there anything unique about SLE outbreaks in Louisiana?
Interestingly, SLE outbreaks often occur after periods of drought, and that's because drought conditions reduce the availability of breeding habitats for mosquitoes, which can lead to higher concentrations of infected mosquitoes in those remaining water sources. And Culex quinquefasciatus, which is a foul water breeder, thrives in those conditions, so their numbers can increase during these times.
So even in dry conditions, we're not necessarily safe from mosquitoes and the diseases they carry? Okay. What about EE? How does it differ from WNV and SLE?
Well, EE is considered the deadliest mosquito-borne disease in the U.S. It has a fatality rate of about 30%.
Wow.
So it is a serious threat, but thankfully human cases are relatively rare.
Okay. So less common, but more dangerous.
Exactly. The primary amplification vector for EE is Culiceta melanura, a mosquito that breeds in freshwater swamps and hardwood forests.
So avoiding those areas might reduce our risk?
It could. but it's not a guarantee. A variety of other mosquito species, including Aedes albopictus, Aedes sollicitans, and Coquetidia perturbans, can act as bridge vectors transmitting the virus from birds to humans.
That makes sense because mosquitoes don't always stick to one habitat or one type of host.
You got it.
All right. So those are the main mosquito-borne diseases with bird reservoirs. What about diseases where humans are the primary reservoir?
Well, two emerging threats in this category are Zika virus and chikungunya. Zika is particularly concerning because it can cause serious birth defects if a pregnant woman is infected.
Right. I remember hearing about that a few years ago. Is it still a threat?
It is. Aedes aegypti, that mosquito we talked about earlier that loves those urban areas, is the main culprit for transmitting Zika.
Right.
And it's a highly efficient vector.
So those container breeding sites around our homes could be putting us at risk for more than just, itchy bites.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. What about chikungunya? What are the main concerns with that virus?
Well, chikungunya can cause debilitating joint pain that can last for months or even years. It's primarily transmitted by Aedes aegyptus and Aedes albopictus, and it's been spreading rapidly in recent years.
And there's no vaccine or specific treatment for chikungunya, right?
Unfortunately, no. Treatment really focuses on just relieving symptoms. Prevention by reducing mosquito exposure is really the best defense.
Okay. That's definitely motivation to step up our mosquito control game. Are there any other diseases with human reservoirs that we need to worry about in Louisiana?
Yeah. Dengue fever is another one to be aware of.
Yeah.
It's also known as breakbone fever because of the severe joint and muscle pain it can cause.
Dengue fever sounds awful. Is it common in Louisiana?
It's more common in tropical and subtropical regions around the world. But Aedes aegypti, the primary vector for dengue, is found in Louisiana. So the potential for local transmission is definitely there, especially as global travel increases.
Okay. So it seems like Aedes aegypti is a repeat offender when it comes to spreading diseases.
It is. It is. That's why controlling those container breeding mosquitoes is so crucial for protecting public health.
All right. So we've covered diseases with bird reservoirs and diseases with human reservoirs. Are there any other diseases we need to discuss?
Yeah, there are a couple more worth mentioning. Lacrosse encephalitis, or LAC, is a viral disease that's maintained in small mammals like rabbits and squirrels. The primary vector for LAC is Aedes triceriatus, that eastern treehole mosquito that we talked about earlier.
So those mosquitoes that thrive in tree holes and containers are also responsible for transmitting LAC.
They are. Most human cases occur in people who live or work near wooded areas where those mosquitoes are prevalent.
That's good information to have, especially if you're spending time outdoors in wooded areas. What about the other disease you mentioned?
Oh, Jamestown Canyon virus, or JCV, is a relatively newly recognized threat in Louisiana. It was first detected in the state in 2017. JCV is maintained in larger mammals, like deer and cows.
So it's more of a rural concern?
It can be. A variety of mosquito species can transmit JCV to humans, but it's more likely to be a problem in areas where those larger mammals are present.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground on mosquito-borne diseases, and it's clear that they pose a serious threat to human health in Louisiana. But before we move on, we need to talk about one more disease: canine heartworm. It's not a human disease, but it is a serious threat to dogs, and it's spread by mosquitoes.
That's an important one to remember, especially for dog owners in Louisiana. Canine heartworm is caused by a parasitic worm that lives in the heart and lungs of dogs, and it can be fatal if left untreated.
So how do mosquitoes spread this parasite?
Well, mosquitoes pick up heartworm larvae when they feed on an infected dog.
Okay.
Those larvae develop inside the mosquito, and then they're transmitted to other dogs when the mosquito bites again.
So basically, any mosquito bite could potentially transmit heartworm to a dog.
Unfortunately, yes. Many different mosquito species can transmit heartworm, and because Louisiana has such a large and diverse mosquito population, it's a widespread problem.
That's scary. What can dog owners do to protect their furry friends?
Well, the good news is that heartworm is preventable. There are a variety of effective medications that can prevent heartworm infection in dogs. It's important to talk to your veterinarian about the best preventative option for your dog, especially if you live in an area with high mosquito activity.
That's a relief. All right, so we've covered the scary stuff, the diseases mosquitoes can spread.
We have.
Now let's shift gears and talk about what we can do to fight back. The training manual devotes a lot of space to explaining the principles and practices of effective mosquito management.
Yeah. And it emphasizes that effective mosquito control isn't just about spraying insecticides. It's about a multifaceted approach called integrated mosquito management, or IMM.
Okay, break that down for us. What exactly does IMM involve?
Well, IMM takes kind of a holistic view of mosquito control. It's about understanding mosquito biology, identifying their breeding habitats, and using a variety of methods to reduce their populations. And it's all about balancing effectiveness with environmental responsibility.
Okay.
We want to control the mosquitoes without harming other organisms or the environment.
So it's not just about, like, killing every mosquito in sight.
Exactly. IMM is about using the right tools at the right time and in the right places to achieve the desired level of control.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Let's unpack the components of an IMM plan, starting with the first step.
Well, the foundation of any successful IMM plan is mosquito sampling and surveillance.
So we need to gather intel before we can launch an attack.
You got it. It's about gathering data on mosquito populations and identifying potential problem areas. This involves regularly monitoring mosquito breeding sites, collecting samples of both larvae and adult mosquitoes, and using a variety of traps to track their abundance and activity.
So it's like a detective's job.
It is.
And what do we do with all this information once we've collected it?
Well, this information is absolutely crucial for making informed decisions about control measures. By understanding where the mosquitoes are, what species are present, and how their populations are fluctuating, we can target our efforts more effectively.
So instead of just like blanket spraying an entire area, we can focus on specific hotspots.
Precisely. That's how we can maximize effectiveness while minimizing the environmental impact.
Okay, so surveillance is step one. What's next in our IMM playbook?
Well, the next step is what we call source reduction, or as it's more commonly known, physical control.
Okay, that sounds less intimidating than chemical warfare. What does physical control involve?
It's all about eliminating or modifying mosquito breeding habitats to prevent mosquitoes from developing in the first place. So, simple things like draining standing water, filling in ditches, clearing clogged gutters, and properly maintaining bird baths and pools can go a long way in reducing mosquito populations.
Wow, it's amazing how something as simple as like dumping out a bucket of water can make a difference.
It really can. And education plays a big role here too.
Right.
Homeowners need to be aware of the potential breeding sites around their properties and take steps to eliminate them.
So source reduction is all about prevention.
It is. It's the most environmentally friendly and sustainable approach to mosquito control. But sometimes prevention alone isn't enough.
Right.
And that's when we might need to bring in chemical control methods.
Okay, so that's when the larvicides and the adulticides come into play.
Exactly. Larvicides target mosquito larvae in their aquatic breeding habitats, while adulticides target adult mosquitoes that are flying around and biting.
Okay, the manual goes into a lot of detail about the different types of larvicides and adulticides that are available. But I think what's important for our listener to understand is that using these chemicals responsibly is paramount.
Absolutely. It's not about indiscriminate spraying.
Right.
It's about choosing the right product for the job, applying it correctly, and using it only when necessary to minimize any potential risks to human health or the environment.
So careful and targeted application is key.
It is. And it's important to remember that overuse of insecticides can lead to resistance.
That makes sense, right? If mosquitoes are constantly exposed to the same chemical, they can develop ways to, like, overcome its effects.
Exactly. That's why it's so important to use a variety of control methods and to rotate insecticides to prevent resistance from developing.
Okay. Now, along with chemical control, there's also biological control, which sounds a bit less harsh. What does that entail?
Well, biological control involves using natural predators to keep mosquito populations in check.
Yeah.
We've already touched on this a bit. But the manual provides more information on how fish and copepods can be used to control mosquito larvae in different types of habitats.
I'm curious about those copepods. What are they and how do they help?
Well, copepods are tiny crustaceans that live in water, and they love to snack on mosquito larvae.
Okay.
They're particularly effective in small, contained habitats like tires, buckets, and bird baths. Places where fish might not be able to survive.
So they're like tiny mosquito assassins.
Exactly. And because copepods can actually withstand drying out, they can persist in those habitats even when the water levels fluctuate. When the water returns, they're ready to go back to work, devouring mosquito larvae.
That's pretty ingenious. Okay, so we've covered surveillance, source reduction, chemical control, and biological control. What else is part of a comprehensive IMM plan?
Well, IMM also involves disease surveillance,
Okay.
which means monitoring mosquito populations and potential hosts for signs of mosquito-borne diseases.
Right.
We do this by testing mosquitoes for the presence of viruses, and also by using what we call sentinel chickens and wild birds to track virus activity.
So it's like an early warning system.
It is. If we see a spike in virus activity in mosquitoes or birds, we know there's an increased risk to humans, and we can ramp up our control efforts accordingly.
Okay, that makes sense. And we can't forget about public education, which is essential for getting the community involved.
Absolutely. Public education is about informing people about mosquito risks, how to protect themselves, and how they can help reduce mosquito breeding sites around their homes. We use a variety of methods to reach people, from traditional media to websites and social media to school programs and community outreach events.
So it's about empowering people to take ownership of mosquito control in their own communities.
Exactly. And finally, we have mosquito susceptibility monitoring, which is essential for tracking the development of insecticide resistance and making sure that our control measures are still effective.
So it's like keeping tabs on whether the mosquitoes are becoming immune to our weapons.
Precisely. We collect mosquito samples and test their susceptibility to different insecticides. This information is crucial for making informed decisions about which products to use and how to manage resistance.
Okay, IMM sounds like a comprehensive and well thought out approach to mosquito control.
It is. And by taking this holistic approach, we can effectively manage mosquito populations, reduce the risk of disease transmission, and protect public health while minimizing harm to the environment.
Now, IMM might sound great on paper, but how does it actually work in practice? Let's take a closer look at some of the specific techniques used, starting with those sampling and surveillance methods we talked about earlier.
That's where it gets really interesting. The training manual gets into the nitty-gritty of how mosquito control professionals actually collect data on mosquito populations. And there are some surprisingly clever methods that are used.
All right, let's dive into those methods.
Well, the most basic technique for larval sampling is dipping.
Dipping, like dipping your toes in the water.
Not quite. It involves using a standard dipper, which is basically a cup on a long handle, to scoop up water and larvae from potential breeding sites.
So they're literally going out there and scooping up mosquitoes.
They are. It's a simple but effective way to get a snapshot of the larval population in a particular area.
But what about those like hard to reach places like tires and tree holes? You can't exactly dip a cup into those.
Well, that's where some more specialized tools come in. Mosquito control professionals might use a siphon, a turkey baster, or even a bilge pump to extract larvae from those tricky spots.
Okay, that makes sense. All right, so we've got the larval sampling covered. What about adult mosquito sampling? How do we catch those pesky flyers?
Oh, there's a whole arsenal of traps used for adult mosquito sampling, each targeting different aspects of mosquito behavior. One of the simplest, believe it or not, is called a landing rate count.
Landing rate count. That sounds pretty straightforward.
It is. A trained technician literally stands in a specific location for a set amount of time and counts the number of mosquitoes that land on them.
So they're basically using themselves as bait.
They are. It might sound kind of rudimentary, but it's a valuable way to assess mosquito activity in a particular area.
I can imagine it's not the most comfortable job, though.
Probably not. And it's important to standardize these counts, meaning everyone doing them follows the same protocol so you can compare data across different locations and time periods.
Makes sense. Now, for those who prefer a less hands-on approach, what are some of those like high-tech traps you mentioned?
Well, one of the most common is the CDC light trap.
Oh, okay.
It uses a light and a fan to attract mosquitoes and then sucks them into a net.
So they're drawn to the light like moths to a flame.
Exactly. Another type is the New Jersey light trap, which is similar but uses a different design.
Are there traps that use things other than light?
Absolutely. Gravid traps target egg-laying females with a, shall we say, fragrant concoction made from hay infusion.
Fragrant is one way to put it. I'm guessing it's not.
Not exactly a Chanel Neon 5 for mosquitoes.
Right. But it's very effective at attracting those females that are looking for a place to lay their eggs.
Absolutely, yeah.
So different traps for different mosquito behaviors. What other types are there?
Well, OV traps are another clever tool. They're simple, inexpensive traps designed to collect mosquito eggs.
How do those work?
They consist of a dark container filled with water and a substrate, like a wooden paddle, where mosquitoes like to lay their eggs.
So it's like a fake breeding site.
Exactly. And they're particularly useful for monitoring container breeding species like Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus.
It's amazing how much we can learn about mosquito populations just by using these different types of traps.
Yeah.
What about species that prefer to rest during the day, like Anopheles quadrimaculatus? How do we sample those?
Well, for those species, we use what are called resting boxes. They're basically just dark, sheltered boxes placed in areas where mosquitoes like to hang out during the day.
So it's like providing them with a 5-star hotel.
Exactly. And mosquito control professionals check these boxes regularly to see which species are present and how their numbers are fluctuating.
Oh, okay. So we've got traps for mosquitoes that are attracted to light, traps for mosquitoes that are looking for egg-laying sites, and even traps for mosquitoes that just want to relax in the shade. What other high-tech tools are out there?
Well, one that's really gaining popularity is the BG Sentinel trap.
Okay.
It specifically targets Aedes aegypti and Aedes albopictus.
Those are the ones that spread Zika, dengue, and chikungunya, right?
Exactly. It uses a combination of human scent and CO2 to attract mosquitoes.
Wow.
And it can even be equipped with an automated counter that transmits data wirelessly.
So it's like a smart trap that can tell us how many mosquitoes are out there and what species they are.
Exactly. And all that data can be fed into those database management systems we talked about earlier,
right,
giving us a real-time picture of mosquito activity.
Okay, so we've covered larval sampling and adult trapping. What about mosquito-borne virus surveillance? How do we track the spread of these diseases?
Well, that involves collecting mosquito samples and testing them for the presence of viruses.
Oh, okay.
In Louisiana, samples are sent to the Louisiana Animal Disease Diagnostic Laboratory, or LADDL.
LADDL.
For testing.
And they're looking for all those nasty viruses we talked about earlier, West Nile, SLE, EE, Zika, chikungunya, all those.
Exactly. LADDL tests for a variety of viruses and then reports the results to both a national database called ARBANET and a state-specific database called ASTS.
So they're keeping track of which viruses are circulating in the mosquito population.
Exactly. And that data is used to assess the risk of disease transmission and to guide control efforts.
So it sounds like mosquito control professionals are working hard to stay one step ahead of these diseases.
They are. It's a constant battle, but the more information they have, the better equipped they are to protect public health.
All right, let's talk about the tools used in chemical control, the larvicides and adulticides.
Okay.
The manual goes into a lot of detail about these, but can you give us just a brief overview of the main types and how they work?
Absolutely. Let's start with larvicides, which are insecticides designed to kill mosquito larvae in their aquatic breeding habitats.
So these are the ones that are applied to standing water.
Exactly. One of the most commonly used larvicides is a naturally occurring bacterium called Bacillus thuringiensis israelensis, or BT for short.
BT. Okay. Tell me more about that.
Well, BT produces toxins that are specifically lethal to mosquito larvae. And what's great about BT is that it's very environmentally friendly.
Okay.
It actually requires an alkaline gut environment to work.
And mosquito larvae have that alkaline gut.
They do. Most other organisms don't.
Okay.
So BT is unlikely to harm them. It's a great example of a targeted approach to pest control.
So BT is a natural product that specifically targets mosquito larvae without harming other creatures. That sounds like a win-win.
It is. It is. Another option is spinosad, which is a newer larvicide that's derived from another naturally occurring soil bacterium. It has a different mode of action than BT, meaning it kills the larvae in a different way.
Why is that important?
Well, having different modes of action is really valuable for resistance management. If mosquitoes become resistant to one type of larvicide, we have another option that still works.
So it's like having a backup weapon in case the first one stops working.
Exactly. And there are also combination products that mix BT and other bacterial larvicides to provide both quick knockdown and longer lasting control.
Okay, so those are the larvicides. What about adulticides? Those are the ones that target the flying adults, right?
Exactly. Adulticides are typically applied as sprays or fogs. And there are a few main types. One of the oldest and most widely used is pyrethrins.
Pyrethrins? I think I've heard of those. Aren't those something you find in those natural insect repellents?
You're right. They're derived from chrysanthemum flowers, so they're naturally occurring insecticides.
So it's like botanical warfare against mosquitoes. How exactly do they work?
Well, pyrethrins disrupt the nervous system of insects.
Okay.
causing paralysis and eventually death.
Sounds effective, but are there any drawbacks to using them?
Well, the main drawback is that they break down quickly in sunlight, so they have a limited residual activity, meaning they don't last very long in the environment.
So they're good for quick knockdown, but not for long-term control.
Exactly. To address that limitation, scientists developed synthetic versions of pyrethrins called pyrethroids.
Synthetic versions, so they're like lab-made pyrethrins?
Precisely. Pyrethroids are more stable in sunlight and have a longer residual activity, making them much more effective for mosquito control.
So they're like the longer-lasting cousins of pyrethrins.
That's a good way to put it. Some common examples of pyrethroids that are used in mosquito control are permethrin, rismethrin, and deltamethrin.
Okay.
You might recognize those names from insect repellents or even those mosquito control products you can buy at the store.
Right. Okay. So we've got the pyrethrins and the pyrethroids covered. What other types of adulticides are there?
Another class is organophosphates. They work by inhibiting an enzyme called acetylcholine esterase, which is essential for nerve function in insects.
So they're also targeting the nervous system, but in a different way than pyrephrins and pyrethroids.
Exactly. Some common examples of organophosphates that are used for mosquito control are malathion and nailed.
It's interesting how these different insecticides have like different ways of attacking the mosquito's nervous system. Now, when it comes to applying these larvicides and adulticides, there seems to be a wide range of equipment that's used. The manual mentions everything from handheld sprayers to truck-mounted sprayers to aerial applications.
Yeah, the choice of equipment really depends on a few factors. The size and type of habitat being treated obviously plays a big role. You're not going to use an airplane to spray a small backyard.
Right.
The specific product being used is also a consideration. Some products are formulated for ground application, while others are designed for aerial spraying. And of course, the goal of the application matters. Are we trying to kill larvae in a breeding site? Or are we trying to knock down adult mosquitoes that are actively biting?
So it's about choosing the right tool for the job.
Exactly. And regardless of what equipment is being used, it's crucial that it's properly calibrated to ensure that the correct amount of insecticide is applied.
Why is that so important?
Well, too little insecticide might not be effective.
Right.
While too much can be harmful to non-target organisms and increase the risk of resistance development.
So it's about finding that sweet spot, enough to kill the mosquitoes, but not enough to harm other creatures or the environment.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Speaking of balance, the manual talks a lot about insecticide resistance, which sounds like a major challenge in mosquito control. Can you explain what resistance is and why it's such a concern?
Sure. Over time, mosquitoes, like any organism, can adapt to their environment. When they're repeatedly exposed to the same insecticide, those that can tolerate the chemical are more likely to survive and reproduce.
So it's like survival of the fittest, but in this case, it's survival of the most resistant.
Exactly. And as those resistant mosquitoes reproduce, they pass their resistance traits onto their offspring. And over time, the entire population can become resistant to that particular insecticide.
So the insecticide becomes less and less effective.
Exactly. And that's a big problem because it limits our options for control.
So what can we do to slow down or prevent the development of resistance?
Well, one key strategy is rotating insecticides.
Okay.
Instead of using the same product over and over again, we alternate between products that have different modes of action.
So we're keeping the mosquitoes guessing.
Precisely. We also want to avoid overuse. We only use insecticides when they're truly necessary, and we use the lowest effective dose.
So it's about being strategic and judicious in our use of these chemicals.
Exactly. We also need to monitor for resistance. We collect mosquito samples and test them regularly to see how susceptible they are to different insecticides. This helps us identify resistance early on so we can adjust our strategies accordingly.
It sounds like resistance management is a crucial part of responsible mosquito control.
It is. It's not just about killing mosquitoes. It's about doing it in a way that's sustainable and doesn't jeopardize the effectiveness of our tools in the long run.
Okay. We've covered a lot of ground on the science of mosquito control.
Right.
But what about the rules and regulations? I'm guessing there are laws that govern how these insecticides can be used?
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The manual goes into some detail about the legal and regulatory framework that governs mosquito control. And while it might not be the most exciting topic, it is essential for understanding the safeguards that are in place.
Okay. So let's wade into those legal waters. Where do the rules come from?
Well, at the federal level, the big one is FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act.
FIFRA. That sounds pretty comprehensive. What does it cover?
FIFRA sets the baseline for pesticide regulation in the United States. It covers everything from the registration and labeling of pesticides to their sale, distribution, use, and disposal.
So it's like the overarching law that governs how pesticides, including insecticides, can be used in the country.
Exactly. And FIFRA is enforced by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA. The EPA has the authority to approve or deny the registration of pesticides, to set limits on their use, and to take enforcement actions against those who violate the law.
So there's a federal agency making sure that these chemicals are being used safely and responsibly.
Exactly, but it's not just a federal issue. Each state also has its own set of pesticide regulations.
What about in Louisiana? Which agency is responsible for overseeing pesticide use in the state?
In Louisiana, that agency is the Louisiana Department of Agriculture and Forestry, or LDAF.
LDAF. So the LDAF is the state level equivalent of the EPA.
In a way, yes. The LDAF is responsible for certification, licensing, and enforcement of pesticide regulations within Louisiana.
So mosquito control programs in Louisiana need to comply with both federal and state regulations.
Exactly. And it's not just those two agencies. Other agencies like the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals and the Louisiana Department of Environmental Quality also play a role in regulating pesticide use, particularly when it comes to potential impacts on human health and the environment.
So it's a complex web of regulations.
It can be.
Yeah.
But these regulations are in place to protect public health and the environment.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the manual also emphasizes the importance of cooperation between mosquito control programs and other agencies.
Right.
Why is that so important?
Well, mosquito control is a complex issue that often intersects with other areas, like wildlife management, agriculture, public health, and even land use planning.
So it's not something that mosquito control programs can do in isolation.
Exactly. They need to work with other agencies to share information, coordinate their efforts, and ensure that mosquito control activities are carried out in the way that considers other priorities and potential impacts.
Can you give some examples of how this cooperation works in practice?
Absolutely. Let's start with wildlife and fisheries agencies.
Okay.
Mosquito control and wildlife management often intersect, particularly in areas with wetlands and other natural habitats that are important for both wildlife and mosquitoes.
So how do those two seemingly conflicting goals work together?
It's all about communication and coordination. Mosquito control programs need to be mindful of the potential impacts of their activities on sensitive habitats and species. They need to work with wildlife and fisheries agencies to ensure that mosquito control doesn't harm non-target organisms or disrupt delicate ecosystems.
So it's about finding ways to control mosquitoes without harming the other creatures that call those habitats home.
You got it. One example of cooperation is in the area of water management.
Okay.
By working together, mosquito control and wildlife agencies can develop water management plans that reduce mosquito breeding while maintaining suitable habitats for wildlife.
That sounds like a win-win. Can you give us a specific example?
Sure. One technique that's used in coastal areas is called open marsh water management.
Okay.
It involves creating channels or openings in marshes to allow fish and other predators to access mosquito breeding areas.
So we're basically giving the mosquito's natural enemies a helping hand.
Exactly. It's a natural and effective way to control mosquito populations without using pesticides.
Wow.
And it benefits wildlife by improving habitat connectivity and increasing food sources for fish and other animals.
That's a great example of how cooperation can lead to innovative solutions. What other agencies do mosquito control programs need to work with?
Well, collaboration with agricultural agencies is also crucial.
Okay.
Agriculture plays a vital role in Louisiana's economy, and mosquito control activities can impact agricultural operations.
How so?
Well, pesticide applications, for example, can harm beneficial insects like pollinators that are essential for crop production.
Right.
And spraying during certain times of the year could interfere with crop pollination or other agricultural activities.
So it's about coordinating those activities to minimize the impact on agriculture.
It is. Mosquito control programs need to work with agricultural agencies to understand their concerns and adjust their operations accordingly.
So it's about finding a compromise that works for both sides.
Exactly. And we also need to collaborate with local governments.
How do local governments play a role in mosquito control?
Well, local governments are involved in activities like drainage maintenance, stormwater management, and land use planning, all of which can impact mosquito populations.
So it's about making sure that mosquito control is considered in those local decision-making processes?
Precisely. Mosquito control professionals might provide input on the design of drainage ditches to minimize mosquito breeding,
Okay.
or work with local officials to enforce ordinances that prohibit residents from, accumulating standing water on their property.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about during a disease outbreak?
Right.
Who do mosquito control programs work with in those situations?
Well, collaboration with public health agencies is absolutely essential during a disease outbreak.
Okay.
Mosquito control programs provide valuable information about mosquito populations, species present, and disease risks.
Right.
While public health agencies lead the efforts to track cases, educate the public, and implement control measures.
So it's a joint effort to contain the outbreak and protect public health.
Exactly. Effective communication and coordination between agencies are critical for a rapid and effective response.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of cooperation with wildlife and fisheries agencies, agricultural agencies, local governments, and public health agencies. Are there any other partners that are crucial for mosquito control?
Well, perhaps the most important partner of all is the public.
The public? How so?
Well, mosquito control isn't just something that happens behind the scenes.
Right.
It requires active participation from the community. The more people understand about mosquitoes, the risks they pose,
Right.
and the steps they can take to protect themselves and reduce mosquito breeding sites, the more effective our control efforts will be.
So public education is a key part of mosquito control.
Absolutely. It's about empowering people to take ownership of the issue.
Okay. That makes sense. It's a team effort.
Okay.
Mosquito control professionals, other agencies, and the public all working together to combat these pesky insects.
Exactly. We're all in this together.
Now, before we move on, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier about the diversity of mosquito species in Louisiana.
Right.
The training manual includes like a detailed illustrated key for identifying different species. And it's fascinating to see like the variation in their size, their color, and even their behavior.
It's like a mosquito field guide for the serious enthusiast.
One thing that stood out to me was the range in size.
Yeah.
Some mosquitoes, like Culiceta internata, can be quite large.
Yeah.
While others, like Aedes aegypti, are tiny.
They are.
And their colors can be quite striking too.
Absolutely. Some species have these distinct patterns of scales and hairs that can help with identification.
Okay.
Aedes aegypti, for example, has that characteristic black and white pattern on its thorax and legs, while Aedes albopictus, the Asian tiger mosquito, has that single white stripe down its back.
It's like they're wearing tiny uniforms.
It is. It's amazing how much variation there is within this one group of insects. And it's not just their appearance that's diverse. Their behaviors and adaptations are equally fascinating.
We talked about how some floodwater mosquitoes lay eggs that can survive for years in dry soil until they're flooded.
Right.
What are some other interesting adaptations that these mosquitoes have developed?
Well, one that comes to mind is the way the larvae of Coquiotidia perturbans, the salt and pepper mosquito, breathe.
Okay.
Instead of using a siphon to get oxygen from the surface, they actually pierce the stems of aquatic plants underwater and get their oxygen directly from the plant tissue.
So they're like little underwater scuba divers.
Exactly. It's a remarkable adaptation that allows them to thrive in habitats that would be unsuitable for other mosquito species.
Wow. The manual also talks about how different species have different feeding preferences.
That's right. While all female mosquitoes need blood to develop their eggs, their choice of host can vary widely.
So some are like specialists while others are generalists.
Exactly. Some species, like Culex quinquefasciatus, readily feed on both humans and birds, while others, like Culiceta melanura, prefer to feed on birds and rarely bite humans.
So knowing which species are present in an area can help us understand, which animals, including humans, are at risk of being bitten.
Precisely. And some species, like Aedes vexans, are known for their aggressive biting behavior and their particularly painful bites.
Okay. I'll be sure to avoid those. Now, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to emphasize something that the manual touches on, the importance of staying ahead of the curve in mosquito control.
Right.
Seems like it's not a static field. There are always new challenges emerging.
You're absolutely right. Mosquito-borne diseases are a constantly evolving threat. New diseases are emerging, existing diseases are spreading to new areas, and mosquitoes are developing resistance to insecticides. It's a constant race to stay one step ahead.
So how do we stay ahead in this race against these tiny but formidable foes?
Well, it requires a multi-pronged approach. First and foremost, ongoing research is essential. Scientists are constantly working to understand mosquito biology, develop new insecticides and repellents, and explore novel control strategies.
Okay.
Like genetic modification and sterile insect techniques.
So it's about pushing the boundaries of our knowledge and developing new tools.
Exactly. But research alone isn't enough. We also need robust surveillance systems to track mosquito populations, identify emerging threats, and monitor the spread of diseases.
So we need to know what we're up against and how it's changing.
Precisely. And finally, we need to be adaptable. Mosquitoes are incredibly resilient creatures, and they're constantly evolving. We need to be prepared to adjust our strategies as needed to stay ahead of the game.
So it's a combination of cutting-edge science, vigilant monitoring, and a willingness to adapt to new challenges.
It is. The fight against mosquitoes is an ongoing battle, but with a proactive and integrated approach, we can effectively manage these pests and protect public health.
All right, I think that's a good place to pause for now. We've covered a lot of ground in this part of our deep dive. We explored the different types of insecticides used in mosquito control, the legal and regulatory framework that governs their use, the importance of cooperation between agencies, and the fascinating diversity of mosquito species that are found in Louisiana.
We've also highlighted the importance of staying ahead of the curve in mosquito control as new challenges are constantly emerging.
Absolutely. When we return, we'll take a closer look at some of the specific technologies that are really changing the face of mosquito control. Stay tuned.
Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about how it's a constant challenge to stay ahead of the curve in mosquito control.
Right.
And I think you're right. This isn't like your grandma's fly swatter anymore. We're in a whole new era of high-tech mosquito management. You hit the nail on the head. The training manual spends a good bit of time highlighting these technological advances. And for someone wanting to be, deeply informed, this is where it gets really exciting.
Well, let's dive into it. What's caught your eye in terms of like mosquito fighting technology?
Well, database management systems are a game changer.
Okay.
They allow mosquito control programs to gather, store, analyze, and share huge amounts of data on everything from mosquito populations and breeding sites to disease trends and even, what control methods are working where.
So it's like having a massive intelligence operation, but for mosquitoes.
Exactly. And by combining this data with geographic information systems, or GIS, they can create maps that show mosquito hotspots and breeding sites. It's like having a real-time mosquito heat map for the whole region.
So instead of blindly spraying everywhere, they can see exactly where their efforts are needed most.
Precisely. It makes control efforts far more targeted and efficient. And speaking of precision, have you heard about the GPS-equipped spray trucks and aircraft they're using now?
I've seen some headlines about drones being used, but tell me more about those GPS trucks and planes. How do they work?
Well, they use GPS technology to guide insecticide application, ensuring the right amount is sprayed in the right place at the right time, no more guesswork or wasted spray drifting into areas where it's not needed.
This sounds like a big step forward in terms of, environmental responsibility.
Yeah.
Not to mention saving money on all those chemicals.
You're right. It's a win-win. Plus, those systems can even keep track of the exact spray path.
Okay.
Providing detailed records. So it's great for transparency, accountability, and just knowing exactly what's been done where.
All right. I have to admit, the tech geek in me is really intrigued now. What about those drones everyone's talking about? Are they really being used to fight mosquitoes?
They absolutely are, and it's pretty fascinating to see how they're being deployed.
Yeah.
Drones equipped with high-resolution cameras, can survey those hard-to-reach areas. Think dense swamps, rooftops, or backyards in densely packed neighborhoods.
So they're like our eyes in the sky, finding those hidden breeding sites that ground crews might miss.
Exactly. They're particularly useful for identifying container breeding sites, which, as we know, can be a major source of those disease-carrying mosquitoes in urban areas.
Yeah.
And get this, some drones are even outfitted with thermal imaging cameras.
Thermal imaging, like what you see on those ghost hunting shows.
Yeah.
What good does that do for mosquito control?
It's actually incredibly useful. Thermal imaging cameras can detect the heat signature of mosquito larvae in water.
So we're not just seeing like standing water, we're seeing the actual larva hiding within it.
Exactly. It's like having X-ray vision for mosquito breeding grounds. And it's not just surveillance. The potential for drones to actually apply larvicides in a targeted and precise way is being explored too.
Now, that would be game-changing, especially in those tough-to-access areas.
Yeah.
No more sending people into dangerous swamps or trying to navigate, backyards full of clutter.
Exactly. It would make larvicide applications much safer, more efficient, and potentially more environmentally friendly. Still early days, but the possibilities with drone technology are really exciting.
I can see why people are so excited about it. All right, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about how social media is being used in the world of mosquito control. It's a tool that can be used for good or bad depending on how it's wielded.
Couldn't agree more. And the manual highlights how important social media is for mosquito control programs to connect with the public. Love it or hate it, social media is a powerful tool for sharing information and addressing concerns.
I think we've all seen how quickly misinformation can spread online. So how are mosquito control programs using social media responsibly?
Well, they're using platforms like Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to keep the public informed about mosquito activity, disease risks, and control efforts.
Okay.
It's a way to be transparent and proactive.
So it's not just about like announcements and warnings, they're actually like engaging with people and answering their questions.
Exactly. And it goes beyond just reacting. They're proactively sharing tips on preventing mosquito bites, like using repellents and eliminating standing water around homes.
Right. That's a good point. Mosquito control isn't just the responsibility of professionals. It's something that we can all participate in.
Absolutely. The more informed and empowered people feel, the more likely they are to take those preventative actions.
I think this deep dive has shown that mosquito control has become like incredibly sophisticated, drawing on the latest science, technology, and even the power of social media. It's not just about spraying and hoping for the best anymore.
You've summed it up perfectly. The training manual really gives a glimpse into this complex world and shows how much work goes into protecting public health.
Yeah. And we've gone from basic insect biology all the way to high-tech drones and the power of social media. For someone wanting to be, well-informed about mosquitoes in Louisiana, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We've certainly explored a wide range of topics. And as we've seen, the fight against mosquitoes is a constantly evolving challenge that requires this multifaceted approach.
So what's the takeaway for our listener? What can they do with all this knowledge?
Well, first, stay informed. Keep up with news from your local mosquito control program. Be aware of disease risks and follow their recommendations for protection. Second, take action. Eliminate breeding sites around your home, use repellents, and encourage your neighbors to do the same. And finally, support those on the front lines. Mosquito control is a public service, and those professionals are working hard to protect your health.
Well said. I think this deep dive has shown just how much goes into keeping those tiny but mighty mosquitoes at bay. Thanks for joining us on this journey of discovery. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.